Oh, all right. So, welcome everybody. I'm Professor Erkki Huhtamo. I'm faculty here at the Design Media Arts Department at the Broad Art Center, UCLA. And this is one of our pop-up lectures, which deals with, I hope, a very interesting topic that touches on many of the interests of the not only the Department of Design Media Arts, but sort of like other sort of like parts of UCLA, social studies, cultural studies, and so on. So I have an honor to introduce you a guest from Europe. And our guest today will be Professor Kari Kallioniemi, who's from Cultural History at the University of Turku, Finland. Kari is someone I have known for a very long time, and I know his really deep and long-term commitments to popular culture, and especially popular music of England. So. Numerous times Kari has been spending time in England studying and studying, meeting other scholars and attending a lot of concerts too, as I know.
In the whole Britain.
Yeah, and not only London, but in Manchester and many other places there. And so the one reason for this lecture today is that Kari just published a pretty substantial book about this topic from Intellect, which is called Englishness, Pop and Post-War Britain, which I think is sort of like a foundation for the lecture today.
Yeah.
But this is also interesting we have here some people from attending my course on the on media archaeology and cross-cultural approaches to media, because in this speech Kari will look at the kind of cross-cultural world from a different angle, which is the idea about Britishness. So in a way, how can a certain kind of a national character be expressed by means of popular culture, and in this case the whole history of the post Second World War British pop music and the culture around it. So I believe that Kari is ready to take questions in the end, so please note down any kind of questions you may have about these topics, and let's try to challenge Kari in the end, so from a sort of like cross-cultural perspective, and also to see what is actually the sort of like contemporary significance of this huge amount of pop music that has flooded the kind of like global music culture for so many decades. So what is the situation right now when we live in the second decade of the new millennium too, when the culture is changing, as everybody knows. But so with that, please help me welcome Professor Kari Kallioniemi.
Thank you, Erkki, and thank you for letting me to do this presentation here. I'll have a copy of a book, and you can take a look at it while I'm doing my thing. Yeah, basically this whole presentation is based on my book, and I will briefly first explain what is my background in the study of Englishness and pop music, and Englishness, pop and post-war Britain, and then I will give some examples of my methodology, well actually only one, and then I will give some examples from the different decades of post-war British popular music after that. And whenever you feel that you would like to ask something, just raise your hand and we can have a talk before the end of this. Yeah, starting points for my work. It could be positioned as this the last paragraph in this slide. Of course, I'm an outsider, and I was an outsider of England, cultural historian and music fan at the same time, who wanted to write something about the history of British pop music. I started to do this as my PhD work 20 years ago when I was studying in Manchester. And during that time in Britain, there was a kind of a feeling and euphoria around the rise of a new swinging London, a kind of a new British invasion thing happening there. And for example, Tony Blair, British Prime Minister from the late 1990s, exploited this atmosphere, and he was called as the first pop prime minister because of his doing. So in many ways, the whole idea of English nationality, politics, and the wider spectrum of culture was somehow tied together back then. And because of this, I got this idea that what about looking English or British pop music history through the whole post-war era, and ask how English and British people have seen their idea of their nationality during this era. And I constructed 5 different starting points for this. Of course, first, the English identity. What is it like in pop music and rock music, especially from the point of male stardom? Then imaginary Englishness, geography is important in this. Where do you come from the British Isles? And do you come from southern or northern England? Do you come from Wales, Scotland, Ireland? And this is linked to this idea that Englishness and Britishness are the kind of it's really difficult in this case to make the difference where Englishness ends and Britishness starts. So all the time people are using these definitions at the same time. But of course, England's and Britain's relationship with Europe, America, and the whole world is important in this. And one case study comes from the British music management, which was especially during this era seen as something very peculiar and authentic, original, meaning that England, Britain was the kind of a talent pool, introducing every kind of new pop fads and pop movements to the world since the emergence of Beatles in the 1960s. But this whole idea of looking at popular music in the context of nationality or national identity came from the fact that after the end of the Cold War, and because of the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the kind of internationalism related to the kind of a leftist worldview of a Cold War era, meaning that, well, actually many people were thinking that national identity didn't mean much anymore during the era of Cold War. But after the collapse of the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the kind of age of neo-right cultural movements and neo-nationalisms emerged. And you can say that, for example, Donald Trump is a kind of embodiment of this in America nowadays, the kind of a person who exploits Americanism. We have in Europe the same kind of a politics who are exploiting in a populist way all the time every kind of a European national sentiments and national identities, It's happening there everywhere, and you can take a kind of a bigger picture by starting to look at it from the end of the Cold War. Of course, this English relationship with its imperial era, its experience of early industrialization, multiculturalism, and especially relationship with Americanization, American popular culture are the kind of a cultural context all the time in that kind of work. But maybe first just one example of my idea how I have been analyzing post-war popular music in this book. I'll take one example from the idea of imaginary nationality. How a certain kind of a cultural product, in this case Jerusalem hymn, has been used and reused, recycled, reconstructed through post-war British popular music is interesting here. I don't know if you know or not this hymn, but it's the kind of a very typical English traditional, even spiritual hymn, always used especially among the royal occasions, for example, royal weddings and that kind of things. It is used in movies, for example, Chariots of Fire, when the certain kind of a very elevated patriotic feelings are being aroused there. It is originally 19th century kind of a hymn, and its lyrics come from the William Blake poem from the early 19th century with the same name, Jerusalem. And my first example will be from the progressive rock band Emerson, Lake and Palmer from the early 1970s. And you can hear from this how this hymn is used in this rock song from this era. I hope I can get this. All right, yeah. Yeah, good. You can see the lyrics here too. Are you familiar with it? Have you ever heard it?
And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green?
So this is basically the hymn or song very much associated to the idea of England as a kind of a green and pleasant land. A kind of a nostalgic idea of England, always based on the idea of southern England, kind of an old university cities, Cambridge, Oxford, certain geographical places in the southern England. So this song somehow expresses a very utopian kind of idea of Englishness, utopian, idealized, nostalgic kind of a version of southern green and pleasant land of England. But because of the lyrics of the song, which William Blake did in the early 19th century, and because William Blake meant it also as a kind of a critic of early industrialization, it has been read as a kind of visionary radical anthem, meaning that it's a kind of a leftist song against early capitalists, somehow explaining the situation in the age of early industrial revolution. And for example, Billy Bragg, a British leftist protest singer from the 1980s, recorded the song like this, and actually wrote a quite long piece explaining why Jerusalem was meant to be a kind of a leftist protest song in the beginning. There are many versions of the song made during this era, but one of the most important and interesting is the techno version made by KLF, British techno act from the early 1990s Communication Liberation Front. And they used Jerusalem in their techno song as arguing that Jerusalem is in the north. It is in the industrial area of England, in the northern England, where the early industrialization happened there, and which is the kind of a grim contrast to the green and pleasant land of southern England. Basically, the idea of the song is that singer Bill Drummond is just going through the list of the northern places like he does here, and there is lyrics scream of noise, but in an ironic way. Actually, for Drummond, because of the greenness of the north is better than south. And the real Jerusalem is situated in the north, in the mind of Drummond here. Sorry. Yep. Yes. Wait.
Manchester, Castleford, Scale, Doncaster, Dewsbury, Halifax, Bingley, Bramall are all in the north.
The whole video is based on the kind of very cliche imagery of North as a kind of a black and white grim rainy place. Now the Jerusalem rises there in the middle of the Jerusalem is in the north, and the south. Well, so this is basically just one idea of how a certain vision of England or Englishness is imagined through this couple of songs. First in the 1970s and then in the early 1990s, and especially imagined because Jerusalem is the kind of imaginary idea of England. A couple of words about post-war Britain. Well, I basically try to argue in this book that there are there are only two periods in the post-war history of Britain. First, the kind of a progressive period starting even earlier than 1950s, but especially in the case of popular music, or pop music started during the 1960s and especially because of the Beatles and the whole British invasion thing, which happened here in America, but also globally. The rise of welfare state, the rise of new kind of a youth culture, consumer society, every kind of a British youth and pop styles, which went globally after the Beatles started to do their thing during this era. But the kind of a backlash for this progressive idea of 1960s was 1980s, and especially neo-right politics of Margaret Thatcher, who attacked against certain kind of idea of Britain as a welfare state, but also Britain as the kind of a political consensus society. And there's always been the big debate in Britain, was Thatcher or Thatcherism really the kind of attack against 1960s, or was it only the kind of a continuation of it, especially in the case how consumer society started in the 1960s, and Thatcher gave a kind of a extra boost for that kind of economic ideal in the 1980s. So in Britain, there's always, in the wider sense, that kind of change and continuity battling there. Also in the case of for example, this idea how modern society Britain is. Is it ancient or modern? Because it's still kingdom, but at the same time, it is seen as the most liberal democracies of a Western world. So there's always contradictions in this, and also during this era. But 1960s, of course, it is the first important decade in this. And you can call it as the golden age of British rock. First, because of a British invasion, but secondly, because of a certain kind of a psychedelia which happened during that era. And especially because of certain kind of a new British rock star after the Beatles emerged in the late 1960s. Pink Floyd might be the most typical band from this era, and especially the singer Syd Barrett, who was very typical British rock eccentric, who did these things. But also this era was important in the case of pop Englishness, because these artists took so many influences from the traditional ideas of English culture, literature, arts, everything. For example, children's book The Wind in the Willows was a big inspiration for Pink Floyd when they were doing their first album there. And of course, British invasion, which happened there in the after Beatles conquered America and the whole world. But what is interesting in the British invasion, and especially in America, was that it created a certain kind of Anglophilia, interest for Englishness in America and maybe in the whole world too. Everything related England and the kind of traditional ideas of Englishness were suddenly cool because of the Beatles and other British bands who conquered America during this time. So these two clips which I have put into the slide from Grossman and Shavner are very good examples of this, that Britain, when it lost its imperial power after the Second World War, it kind of created the new kind of version of English or British Empire by pop music then. And producing youth cults, pop bands, trendy clothing, whatever related to this was in the core of this whole thing. I put one example of this Anglophilia and how British bands used the certain kind of traditional ideas of Englishness in their work into this. Herman's Hermit song, I'm Henry VIII, I am, where Henry VIII was the English king from the 16th century, and in the 19th century, in the Victorian era, one music hall artist made the kind of a mockery of this king by writing this song, I'm Henry VIII, I am. And Herman's Hermits, very popular British invasion group here, took a song and made it as the kind of a beat and pop version.
I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an Henry. She wouldn't have a Willie nor a Sam. No Sam. I'm a right old man, I'm Henry. Henry VIII, I am. Second verse, same as the first. I'm Henry VIII, I am.
I don't know how much this makes sense
now. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an Henry.
That kind of beatification of the old music hall song.
Good night.
This will take a while to get this right. But yeah, now it goes. Yeah, good. But there are, you can argue that there are many British invasions. One which happened in the 1960s, the second one in the 1970s, 1980s. And there's a kind of argument in the history of popular music. When did the first one ended? When did the second one started? What are the differences of these British invasions? But I think one thing which covers all of these invasions is that they somehow spreaded the certain kind of idea of swinging London around the world in every case. And this was also related to the idea of Union Jack, British flag as the kind of fashion item. It was first used as the kind of anti-establishment pop art statement also in the 1960s, but it came really quickly as the kind of a symbol for the coolness of popular music. But it became also during this era in the late 1960s, during the 1970s as the kind of a transgressive sign, which was used especially by every kind of a British far-right, neo-right groups, neo-Nazis in England. So there's a certain kind of an element of ultra-nationalism also in this fair. But in America, in the 1960s, there happened the kind of a anti-British invasion thing, meaning that American bands started to use American history in the same way as English bands. British bands were using British history in their image and in their work. I've taken one example of this here, Paul Revere and the Riders, who used American history in their name, American independent war in their image, and did that kind of a television appearance in the 1965. So you can see it is a Union Jack there, but also Stars and Stripes images from the American Independence War. And that's how American bands also started to do their history as kind of a cool reference point.
Don't it seem like it's just keep getting harder to find, and all your kids say bringing you peace of mind before you find out it's too late, girl. You better get straight. No, it's not with kicks. You just need help, girl. Well, you think you're gonna find yourself a little piece of paradise, but it ain't happened yet. So, girl, you better think twice. Don't you see, no matter what you do, you'll never run away from you. And if you keep on running, you'll have to pay the price. And don't it seem like it's just keep getting harder to find, and all your kids say bringing you peace of mind before you find out it's too late, girl. You better get straight. No, you don't need kicks to help you face the world each day. That road goes nowhere. I'm gonna help you find yourself another way. Kids just keep getting harder to find, and all your kids say bringing you peace of mind just before you find out it's too late, girl. You better get straight.
and where, of course, the British invasion happening in the early 1980s was again important in this in early Reagan America. But I think I'll skip this slide and go straight to the 1970s and to the idea how nationalism or neo-nationalism was rising in Britain during this era, especially because Britain joined into European Union in 1973. There were more and more immigrants in Britain during this era, and because of the economy was coming down, there was every kind of societal turmoil happening in Britain during this decade, especially because of the economic situation. There were certain kind of conservative neo-right or right politicians, for example, Enoch Powell, who were exploiting these populist sentiments. And Enoch Powell is important here because he made the famous Rivers of Blood speech in 1968, where he actually said that we'll have to get immigrants back to their home countries, or if we don't do it, there will be rivers of blood like in the ancient Rome, in the streets of Britain. And that created a really big controversy. And the Rock Against Racism, maybe the most famous protest movement from the 1970s, was organized because of Enoch Powell's sayings, but also because some British stars started to flirt with these ideas. David Bowie, Eric Clapton, Rod Stewart, superstars from this era were giving interviews where they were backing Enoch Powell and somehow saluting him and thinking that Enoch Powell is right. He will have to get rid of immigration problem. So there was a kind of a continuing flirting or playing with the ideas of neo-right, ultra-right during this era in Britain, especially in the punk rock culture. But I've chosen one example here. British punk new wave artist Jonna Lewis' song Hallelujah Europa, which he recorded in 1978, and in which he somehow ironically explains the British relationship with the European countries. But what is really controversial in this song, and especially in this video, is that suddenly there's Adolf Hitler and Nazis from the 1930s, 1940s were mixed with a kind of images of Europe. So basically Louis and that kind of stars are somehow associating Europe with a Nazi fascist history in there.
Of the Irish domain to the Swiss Alps of white snow and pure rain, and then it's off to the softness of Spain. seas to Mediterranean. There is a sense of communication, like all the nice girls in Copenhagen.
Again, I don't know what kind of sense this song and video made almost 40 years ago makes today. But I think it was partly meant to be as a kind of a punk provocation. So this idea that Europe is somehow Europeanness is imagined through the ideas of Nazism and fascism is meant to be a kind of provocation there, but also as a kind of a fascination for this history. Because in Britain in 1960s, 1970s, there were all the time happening that kind of things in the wider spectrum of culture, in literature, television, cinema. Nazist past, European fascist past was very much the kind of inspiration and influence for every kind of popular and also high culture in Britain, and mainly because of the economic situation and societal turmoil happening in Britain then. But what is interesting here, there was a big debate in the late 1960s, 1970s, that the new kind of a British rock star or British superstar is the kind of equivalent of old fascist leader. So basically meaning that the new rock star creates the certain kind of the same feelings, sentiments as these fascist Nazist leaders did in the 1930s and in the 1940s. There's a really interesting movie made in the 1967 called Privilege, where actually the argument or the narrative in this film is that Anglican Church in England and the government tries to manipulate one pop star, and the government and church organizes the kind of a Nazist rally where it tries to use this pop star to manipulate the youth of Britain. So this idea that rock star is the kind of a new version of fascist leader is very much there.
Slate one, take one.
Privilege. Slate one, take one. The start of a new experience in the cinema. Privilege. A new insight on a new kind of idol.
I'm a person. I'm a person. I'm a person. I'm a person.
Stephen Shorter, pop singer. He's not so much a person as a puppet whose strings are pulled for a scheme of total nightmare. Privilege is a terrifying and withering expose of the misuse of power in an age of illusion.
I need my freedom, not your sympathy.
Starring Paul Jones, one of Britain's top pop entertainers, as Stephen Shorter. His first motion picture, your first chance to share this exciting event.
Set me free, set me free.
Gene Shrimpton, international favorite. The face on every major magazine cover the world over.
I've been a bad.
Now the girl with the most beautiful face makes her sensational debut on the cinema screen to give a portrait at once unconventional and memorable.
My parents have got this place in the country and they're away at the moment, and I think we should go there.
Like everybody. We want something. I mean, it's obvious what you want, isn't it?
Privilege, a John Heyman, Peter Watkins production. Directed by Academy Award winner Peter Watkins.
I reckon the director's a bleeding nut.
Peter Watkins, this explosive new talent, first hit the headlines when the BBC banned his highly controversial film, The War Game. Now he assails the big screen as he blows the lid off the pop music world. And we can't wait to hear the uproar.
This is the end scene of the film.
A congregation, all on their knees, his arms outstretching to you and me.
Privilege, the film that points the way to rebels with a cause. A scathing drama about organized nightmare. The motion picture that says what others dare not even think.
Bad boy, here comes the night, we'll be alright. I've been a bad, bad boy.
Yeah, so this fascination for fascism or Nazism was depicted in many cases in this era. For example, Scottish band Skids, they did their record cover in the style of a 1930s Nazist poster from Berlin Olympics. every kind of bands. For example, Joy Division flirted with the imagery from Nazi era, and there were every kind of material and popular cultural cinematic material which inspired these bands. For example, American musical happening in the late 1920s, early Nazist era in Berlin was big inspiration for these artists. And David Bowie was of course one of these stars. Maybe I'll put that slide first. One of these first stars who flirted with this idea. David Bowie. Maybe basically because he was living in LA and was doing too much coke here. He went a bit mental and started to give that kind of interviews to the newspapers, magazines, where he was comparing Adolf Hitler to the rock and roll stars, and somehow also prophesizing the certain kind of a fascist revolution or near-right revolution happening especially in Britain. But Bowie was always interested about using this neo-right, neo-nationalist imagery in his work. For example, there's a big debate: is British fascist flag designed by Oswald Mosley in the 1930s, there below, the inspiration for the famous lightning strike image of Bowie's Ziggy Stardust Aladdin Sane era. There's a lot of references in Bowie lyrics to fascism, to Nazism. There's a female Führer called Führerling in the song Candidate, Hail John, phrase in the lyrics of Golden Years can be seen as one part of it. So Bowie was one of those artists especially fascinated about this idea of kind of a dystopian image of nationalism, or totalitarian image of nationalism. But again, it can be argued that Bowie did it as an artist, as a kind of dandiest British pop artist who was always trying to be controversial, and who was always reconstructing his image. And this era in the mid 1970s, when he was talking about this, was just one part when he started to get fascinated by European culture when he was living in LA, and actually moved from LA to Berlin, and somehow tried to destroy his Anglo-American rock star roots or his star identity as the kind of a typical Anglo-American superstar. There's a really good, interesting video and song by Bowie made in the 1980s, which can be read as the kind of Bowie's personal history related to his idea of escaping first England, then escaping LA, and maybe escaping Berlin in the end. The song, the lyrics, and the visuals in the music video somehow try to say that all of this reconstructing, all of this flirting is only because Bowie is the kind of a troubled artist, the kind of a troubled artist, always fascinated about every kind of culture around him, and somehow maybe giving regrets in the song too about what he had done in the past. But it's a really good song and a really good video, and it can be analyzed in many ways. And it's also the starting point for Bowie's 1980s superstar career.
Oh no, don't say it's true.
Because of all of these new Roman communities and victory depicted in the video.
Hope you're happy too. I've laughed all I've needed love. So
Also using the first time the new technology which became very famous in the 1980s.
But I'm hoping to kick because glad it is glowing. Ashes to ash and funk to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low. Time and again I tell myself I'll stay clean tonight, but the little green wheels are following me. Oh no, not again. I'm stuck with a valuable friend. Happy, hope you're happy too. One flash of light, but no smoking pistol. I've never done good things. I've never done bad things. I never did anything out of the blue. Whoa. Wanna next to break the ice. Wanna come down right now. Ashes to ashes, funk to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an on-time road. Say, to get things done, you better not mess with Major Tom. My mama said, to get things done, you better not mess with Major Tom. My mama said, to get things done, you better not mess with Major Tom. My mama said, to get things done, you better not.
You can think that he's talking with his mother there in the seaside there, regretting his saying sorry to his mother or something. So basically, one of my main arguments in this book is that both David Bowie and Morrissey are the kind of escape artists. In the case of Morrissey, Anglo-Irish artists who have always been escaping their roots as English stars. But while they have been doing this, they have been exaggerating and playing with their English cultural identity at the same time. Morrissey is the same kind of a person, a kind of provocator, always flirting with the extreme ideas. and also he flirted with the ideas of neo-right fascist things in the late 1980s, 1990s in Britain, and caused huge controversy in the media because of it. But Morrissey also relocated from England first to LA and then back to Europe, to Rome. And I think he even moved to Paris after Rome. I don't know where he lives at the moment, but through this fascination first with American culture, then European culture, he created his sense of English identity, or the kind of imaginary English identity related to his political side, which is of course full of every kind of activism, animal rights activism, vegetarianism, whatever there is. You can find, of course, these clips from the YouTube. I tried to open this link, but I found out that it's blocked now. So I think I'll go straight to the last slide, to the conclusion, which is about the conclusion of the book. And I conclude this whole story of pop and post-war Britain by arguing that Britain is always haunted by its past. Well, in the wider sense of culture and society, but especially in the case of popular music and pop music. There's every kind of references in British pop music to the every kind of historical eras of Britain. And one reference point is the English Civil War from the 17th century, used in punk, in folk rock, in heavy metal. You just named it. PJ Harvey made a really good and interesting album a couple of years ago, where he tried to make her vision of this idea, how England is stuck into the past. And when critics were analyzing this album, many critics said that this is the kind of a PJ Harvey's art of hauntology, taken from Jacques Derrida's concept of hauntology, meaning that the more nation, or in this case Britain, tries to escape its past, for example, its leftist past, its fascist past, all of these pasts will surely come back and haunt contemporary neoliberal society. That's one narrative going there in PJ Harvey's Let England Shake album. So basically, PJ Harvey tried to create that kind of album where he creates this idea how England is both haunted and hypnotized by its past, and somehow hopelessly stuck into it at the same time. The whole video album was made of this. The whole music video album was filmed out of this album. I think most of these songs you can find them from YouTube, but I've taken one example there as the last example of this lecture, Let England Shake, where you can see the idea of how England's imaginary or imaginary idea of England is visualized in this music video of PJ Harvey's Let England Shake.
The West asleep, let England shake, weighted down by the silent dead. I fear our blood won't rise again, won't rise again. England's dancing days are done. Another day, Bobby, for you to come home and tell me the difference. I didn't.
So all of these desolated places, desolated background in this video series are the symbols of all kind of a decay of
The West asleep, let England shake, weighted down by the silent dead. I for our fear in it, not for.
That's funny how it goes there, eh?
Oh, I can't bloody get it right. Right, let's get serious.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so Kari, thank you very much for the presentation. So, I think we have a little bit of time, maybe to ask some questions about this presentation, and I would like to encourage everyone to and also. Please ask if there's some things that you found interesting, but would like to be clarified and things. I think that I basically have two very huge questions to Kari, which I don't think he will be fully able to answer, even if we stayed here until the midnight, But so I guess that the first question is that England. So we have had all these like Kari said, British invasion. So when this British pop music and pop culture became so influential in many places. So my first question for Kari would be that, and so you, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's actually one of the advantages why you can do this research is that you are looking at this as an outsider in a way.
Yeah.
So Kari is not British, but he's a Finnish researcher who's deeply involved in this and understands it. But so you have a certain kind of a distance from outside. And that's why how you see these trends.
Inside, outsider, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe
but at the same time, my question would be that what do you imagine would happen if the point of observation point was even further? So let's say if we look from China, if we look from India, of course India was part of the British Commonwealth. If we look from Japan, or if we look from Singapore, so how does this? How could we do it, and how do you think that this kind of idea about this kind of Englishness expressed through this popular culture will change? I mean, when we look at it even further away, this it's just probably something you cannot fully answer, I think, but maybe you have some ideas about that. The other question, if I also mention this, very very obvious. Now England is going through a very radical change because it has decided to leave the European Union, and I'm of course kind of interested in hearing how is this very radical process happening right now. How is it reflected in the British popular culture and music? So are the musicians already commenting on it somehow? I think that this PJ Harvey is astonishingly. That's a great CD and it's a great music video and really important thing. But that was 5 years ago already.
Yeah.
So what's happening after PJ Harvey?
Before Brexit.
Yes.
Yeah. But maybe first your first question.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this is a really good thing to ask. How do people outside the Western world see Englishness? And well, first into my mind comes phenomena like Harry Potter, New Sherlock, that kind of a film and television series, where a certain kind of Englishness and English, a bit old-fashioned idea of England is portrayed or recycled again. And these are, I think, massive global things now, especially New Sherlock, which takes late 19th century Victorian novels to the contemporary era. And of course Harry Potter is the second example. Maybe James Bond too, because of a new James Bond films made recently. And I can't remember was it the second one or Quantum of Solace or something, which was filmed in Shanghai, and it was filmed there mainly because it was targeted to Chinese market with James Bond merchandise. So I think there are outside in India, in the East, in Asia, maybe Latin America too, of a certain kind of more outside-ed kind of idea of looking at English because of these popular culture products.
How about the other question? I want to give a chance also students to kind of ask questions. So just about this, how is this Brexit, so the England deciding to leave Europe, can you see any also kind of reflections on the popular music right now? Are the musicians commenting on that?
Yeah, there isn't much because one reason is that there isn't much protest music of a kind of a music commenting British society made recently. I can remember only one band called Sleaford Mods, which has written about this Brexit and this new neo-nationalism, apart from PJ Harvey, but it's very rare. I think it might be starting now, and especially when people in England are starting to to realize what will happen when Brexit happens, because there's a certain kind of a shock still in Britain because of a Brexit. And it might be that there will be the second referendum. So basically meaning that British people, English people can have a second vote. Do we leave
If they really
Europe or
want to
not?
leave.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think it might be coming, and especially when this Brexit process has now been started.
Okay, so does anybody have any question or comment, or something you would like to hear a bit more from Kari or something? Don't be shy. Okay, so I'll give you the mic so that everybody hear you speak, and it not so that you feel like a rock star, you know.
Where do less mainstream forms of music like ska and reggae fit into this narrative?
Yeah, in many ways, but actually I edited that bit away from the book because well basically only because the publisher said that it should fill into the certain amount of words. But of course, especially in the 1970s, reggae, ska, every kind of a multicultural British pop started back then and commented with immigration problems, neo-right things, neo-right political parties. There's a lot of reggae songs about Enoch Powell, for example, made in the 1970s. A kind of a protest reggae songs made against Enoch Powell and Powellism. And during the Thatcher era, there are more and more that stuff all the time. But I think it's another story. It's a bit difficult to squeeze that story into this. There's a really, if you're interested, there's a really good book made by Nabil Zuberi recently about this. Black music in Britain or something like that. Yeah.
I believe that there's because you talk about this such a huge amount of material, like this British tradition.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
always have to make some choices.
Yeah. So it was, the process was editing all the time.
Does anyone else want to sort of like ask something? Yes.
So you said that a lot of British music now, or it's still haunted by British past and it influences their music, but how do you feel this trend will go on as more British bands become like more mainstream and popular, and they start to influence more like different countries, like for example bands that are mainstream here in America and not as in touch with their British roots?
I think this narrative or history of British invasion, where British bands were influencing other bands in for example in America and Europe, that has stopped. Very recent that kind of movement happening anymore. And
can you mention the name of a group or something that sort of like you think matches this kind of a British band? That's are you talking about something like Coldplay or something like mainstream band in that sense?
Yeah, Coldplay might be seen as an example of global English success, but I think Coldplay is playing their English identity down all the time. It's not portraying it in its full glory or something. Basically, it's happening in the cases like new Sherlock and Harry Potter and that kind of things, but not so much in pop music or rock music.
So do you feel that the bands like Coldplay do it deliberately, so they don't want to be associated with this Britishness, Englishness, because the British invasion is no longer such kind of like a selling point that is what after the Beatles it was the big selling point in many places.
It is seen as a bit as a cliche or old-fashioned kind of thing. Of course, Beatles and Rolling Stones, The Who, that kind of bands, they are always there. Everybody knows them. These bands are listened still, but I think they are not so much associated to the idea or the history of British invasion anymore. They are just good rock bands from the past or something like that.
I would actually agree with what you're saying. Like you mentioned the band like The Who. I think many people know it's such a classic band. So I think that even though in the 60s The Who did some controversial actions with Pete Townshend's jacket, I think he made out of the Union Jack. So he made a jacket of the British flag that raised a lot of controversy at the time. And
it was the kind of a pop art statement for using this jacket.
And the Who, when there was a young band, so I think it was very much identified with the youth cultures in England, like the mod culture, the modern boys, that kind of culture. But later it became part of this kind of like a multicultural music industry. So like I think that people identified more with that than with this Englishness, right?
So it's more part of a kind of a trans culture or transatlantic culture, maybe.
I would be interested because so I'll tell you, Kari. So we've been talking about the fact that we all have many different cultural backgrounds, and actually very few of us have this kind of a, shall we say, like traditional American background. Like I think it's also part of Los Angeles, it's part of California, but it's also where the culture is right now. As you know, I'm from Finland. I'm not American. Kari is from Finland. He's definitely not American, and we still follow culture from here and there. So I would be very interested in hearing from some of you. I mean, like as part of growing up, you know, wherever you have been growing up. So does anybody have any sort of like point to make about like what did British music mean for you, if anything? Maybe now or maybe when you were younger or something like that. Was it something special that you even paid attention to? Does anybody have any kind of comment on this? Yeah, so let me give it to you.
I don't know, my parents listen to a lot of classic rock. Like my dad's favorite band is Pink Floyd. So it's just like, I just like think of this music as like the classics, you know, it's just, but yeah.
So in your family, so to say, your dad used to play Pink Floyd and like from records, and you heard Pink Floyd because of that? When you were younger, so you heard Pink Floyd played by your dad? Or?
Yeah. I mean, I've just like heard this music for a while, and it's just kind of like my parents' music, though. You know, it's not my music. I go through phases.
Oh, sorry, what?
I go through phases, like different kinds of music.
Oh, yeah.
I actually listen to a lot of music in like other languages.
Yeah.
Can I
Cause,
someone else? I mean, that also if your answer would be, well, no, I listen to completely different music and not at all English, that would be an interesting thing to hear. Does anybody want to say? All right, yes.
Yeah, like I never grew up with like the classic rock bands at all, but I was still like aware of them just because like they're so pervasive, just like in culture as like just like cornerstones kind of like classic rock to like my generation at least, I guess. So I didn't grow up with it, but I'm still like really aware of like how important it is culturally and like how many people identify with it and all that.
Anyone else? I think almost everybody listens to some kind of music, isn't that? Yeah.
But I think for me, I just distinguish, divide music into different language. So I don't know if this one is Canadian or American or Britain, like something like that. So grew up in China, and we always put Europe and America together, say them together. So I don't have the the how to say, the sense to
So this is a very interesting comment, I think.
Yeah.
The language that
Yeah.
So when they sing in a certain language,
Yeah.
that creates a certain identity for them.
Yes.
Is there anyone else who has had some like a similar type of idea that it's the when they are singing English language that creates the sort of like? I would be very curious to hear if others have. This is actually a good, interesting comment because it is about
It's
this
true.
cross-cultural
Yeah.
way of looking at things. Because I mean that, like, we have to understand the fact that looking at from like some other part of the world, it doesn't look at all like clear that these things are divided within this English language group, these traditions.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting that.
Yeah, so I don't know the singer or the group is from the certain area. I just know they sing in English, something like that.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any comment on other comments along these lines? Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't grow up with it, because I didn't listen to it really at all, like, I never really thought about it as distinctly British or anything, really. I was just like, oh, like, that's just, like white people, like, it's just like white music. It's just, like, people, like, white people grow up with this music, white people, like, indulge it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, like, it was, like, in my mind, it was, like, a different category. It was just, like, oh, there's music, like, I listen to, there's music my parents listen to, and then, like, there's just, like, other music that's, like, out there in other people's backgrounds. So I identified it more with the people that listen to it rather than their actual roots, maybe.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm still bugging you with this, even with a short answer to this question. So, would some of you say that the kind of music, let's say, when you were like in your teens and like high school or something. So did some of you grow into kind of like place where the music you listened to was very much like local music, so like from the local traditions or bands that came from the cities or the country that you were growing up? Has anybody had, or was this kind of multicultural music industry always part of that experience, so that the music could come from in different languages from different parts of the world? Yeah, let me give you. Yeah, please. It goes out on the internet.
Okay. Like in the city where I was born and raised, I think language plays. I agree with her in language playing such a big part in just telling the audience or the listeners the difference between where the music is from. Like the city I was born is very near Taiwan, and we speak the same dialect as the dialect of Taiwan. So if I hear that in that language, which I do not understand, I can immediately tell it's from that region. And once I moved to Canada and then eventually here, I've never heard such song again. But if I did anywhere else, I would know it's from that region. So and of course, there would be different rhythms and tempos that apply to that unique kind of music, but for me, I differentiate it by the language and the dialect.
So I'm interested about this new Sherlock thing. Is it famous? Is Benedict Cumberbatch famous in America? You
so does anybody like Benedict Cumberbatch?
Because in Europe he's seen as the kind of embodiment of Englishness.
Yeah.
And a bit old-fashioned version of English.
And the name is old-fashioned English.
Dandish male. Yeah, and the name, of course. Yeah. And Martin Freeman actually too, as a kind of a laddish version of this identity, but still with certain kind of a portrayal of Englishman there.
So maybe we should start finish little by little. I just mentioned that I think that out of these examples, one little comment. So there was one really shocking example of what you showed, and this was this. I don't even remember his name. This punk, the Hallelujah. What was it called? Europe.
Jonah Louis.
Yeah, and the Hallelujah to Europe.
Yeah.
That is a very, very kind of still a kind of very, very controversial and strange thing, with those school children singing together, and then how they cut the classic documentary footage of Hitler greeting like little kids, and anyway it's a British singer, and then linking the bagpipes playing, so the kind of combination that of cultural, like British and traditional elements like Scottish and British, and then this really kind of ruthless repeated imagery of Nazis, and then the shots about children like in a school situation, how these are combined. This is still a kind of explosive, I think, the kind of combination. So it's still for me it's a very, very shocking. But you provided an interesting example that I think you said that it is shocking because it expressed these punk moments, this kind of like a play with this kind of shocking things.
Kind of a punk provocation.
Yeah, just like they put like a safety pins to the picture of the Queen of England and that kind of things. And some punk musicians had were kind of left-wing guys, kind of for left-wing ideas, but they still were wearing like swastikas, like Nazi symbols.
Yeah.
So combining symbols that don't seem to be fitting with each other at all as a kind of a provocation. So left and right in the same thing. I think that's something to think about. It's at least I had never seen that actually, and I find it actually kind of highly interesting, but still, at least in my way of thinking, very, very controversial. Hasn't lost any of the controversy, and because it seems to be also going to that kind of very kind of important issue and problematic issue, saying in a way that education would be linked with that kind of Nazi indoctrination.
Yeah.
This was also something that Pink Floyd, in a very controversial way, in the Wall album, sort of like touched in that we don't need any education.
We don't need no education.
So, which is kind of like this kind of a point that seems to be linking to a little bit this kind of Nazi idea.
Yeah.
And I think
and to the contemporary ideas of populism, where, for example, Trump is saying that we don't need no education. We don't need that. This and that cultural values, cultural institutions, that kind of thing.
This is exactly what I wanted to say, because Donald Trump said somewhere that I love the uneducated.
Yeah.
He said it openly. I love people who don't know anything about anything because I can manipulate them. And whatever I think we need education. We have to be sophisticated people who understand culture from many aspects. We have to be sophisticated people who don't understand culture only from one narrow national identity. we have to live in a global culture where we all come from already, and that's where we have to learn, and I think teach others to live in global culture. This is also why I think talking about cross-cultural communication is so important. I very strongly believe in this idea. That I think that this was a very, I hope you also found it very useful to look at the way, because what Kari was doing and what the book is about is like showing how a certain kind of a identity was constructed through the popular culture and music.
Especially this idea that nationalism and national ideology is the kind of ideology which gives you every kind of versions of this imagining and portraying nationalism. So it's the kind of it's the inspiration for both good and bad in this case.
So if anybody has one final comment, so we just have time. Yeah, and great. No, yeah, take my microphone. Through mic.
I don't know if you're aware, but there's actually like a very strong, like obsessive nature of like young teens on like Tumblr mostly, with like Sherlock and Doctor Who. Like it's like a weird, like very strong fandom base where it's like it almost feels like a fetishization of like British culture. Like it's very strange, like how it's only like those 2 shows or like 3 shows if you want to include whatever. But like I think it's really interesting how like as particularly like American teens like at that age, a lot of them go through that phase. So I don't know if that's relevant or interesting, but I didn't know if you knew about that.
Yeah, because I think that's connected to the idea of British eccentricism. That individuality is so valued in Britain and in English culture, that it's full of eccentric persons, and it's the kind of it's the most liberated or unique nation because it's full of these eccentric, weird persons, and you can be as eccentric as you like. And certain kind of stars like David Bowie, Morrissey, and of course Benedict Cumberbatch are exploiting that view or using it.
All right, so let's thank Kari for his presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining, and I will send you some more material also for next week. And